In the entire history of modern media, you'd be hard-pressed to find a corporate resurrection story quite like Marvel Entertainment's. So what we're going to do today is conduct an autopsy. We're going to dissect how a company literally on the verge of total liquidation managed to engineer one of the most valuable turnarounds we've ever seen. And to do that, we have to start at the absolute bottom.
Look at this number, $2.38. In 1996, that's what the market thought Marvel was worth. This isn't just a low stock price. This is a terminal diagnosis. It's the end result of a collapsing market and a mountain of debt so high it forced the company into Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
And then there's this number, $4.3 billion. That's the price Disney paid just 13 years later. You're looking at an increase of over 2,000% from where they were post-bankruptcy. This isn't just the valuation. It's the payoff for one of the most brilliant, high-stakes gambits in corporate history.
So the gap between those two numbers, that's where our story is. It holds one of the most important business lessons of our time. And the central question is simple. How on earth did they do it? Let's begin the autopsy.
You see, to really understand the rebirth, first, we have to perform an autopsy on the corporate death. And let's be clear, this collapse wasn't just a string of bad luck. No, it was the direct, predictable result of a deeply flawed strategic doctrine.
The numbers, as always, tell the story. Just look at the period between their peak in '93 and the bankruptcy in '96. The stock price, it just evaporated. That $15 million profit flipped into a nearly $50 million loss. And the debt? Well, the debt ballooned to over $600 million. The company wasn't just struggling, it was hemorrhaging cash and absolutely drowning in leverage.
So, what was the root cause? It all traces back to Ronald Perelman's strategy of what I call value extraction. He loaded the company with debt to buy businesses that had little to do with the core brand. He doubled the price of comic books, and this is the real kicker, he used the proceeds from the 1991 IPO not to invest back into the company, but to pay out dividends. It was a strategy designed to raid the brand, not to build it.
And this had a totally predictable effect. As industry insider Chuck Rosansky pointed out, the whole strategy was based on a flawed idea that you could just keep squeezing your most loyal customers forever. Well, you can't. The fans responded by simply walking away, which collapsed the very market that Marvel itself had artificially overheated.
And the result, of course, was inevitable. On December 27, 1996, the company made it official and filed for bankruptcy. The value extraction model had finally hit its logical and terminal endpoint, complete insolvency. But then, out of that bankruptcy, a new leadership team emerged, and they had a completely different vision. Their plan wasn't about salvaging the old, broken model. It was about inventing an entirely new one from the ground up.
This right here, this illustrates the massive pivot. The old way was just to license out their characters for, really, small fees. The new strategy, which was the brainchild of an executive named David Maisel, was to self-finance their own movies. Why? To keep 100% of the profits, and even more importantly, to keep creative control. They were going to stop thinking about standalone movies and start building an interconnected universe.
Okay, but think about the challenge here. It was immense. Marvel's crown jewels, we're talking Spider-Man and the X-Men, were already licensed out to Sony and Fox, forever. And the company itself was cash poor. So how do you build an empire when you have no money and your most bankable assets are already gone?
Well, the answer was an absolute masterstroke. By financing the films themselves, Marvel could guarantee that all its remaining characters existed in one single shared universe. That creative control allowed them to build a new kind of narrative asset, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which, as we now know, became far more valuable than the film rights to any one single character.
Now, a great vision is one thing, but it needed capital, a lot of capital. And that's why the story of Marvel's turnaround is, at its core, a story of absolutely brilliant financial engineering.
The weapon they created was something called non-recourse debt. And you really need to understand this detail because it's critical. It's a special type of loan where the risk is completely isolated. What that means is, if the movies failed, the lender could only seize the collateral, which was the film rights themselves, but they couldn't touch Marvel's core business, the comic book publishing. It was a firewall.
So in 2005, they went out and secured a massive $525 million credit facility from Merrill Lynch. And because the debt was non-recourse and insured, it actually received a AAA credit rating. Think about that. This gave a studio that hadn't even made a movie yet unprecedented financial firepower, all without having to bet the entire company.
So what was the collateral for this $500 million loan? It was this group of characters. Now today they're household names, but back then they were considered Marvel's B-list. These were the assets that other studios didn't even want because they seemed too niche or old-fashioned. Marvel was literally forced to build its empire on the characters nobody else believed in.
And the pressure was just absolute. As Iron Man director Jon Favreau said, he was constantly reminded of the stakes. Failure didn't just mean a bad opening weekend. It meant the bank would seize the entire remaining library of characters, which would have effectively been the end of Marvel as a creative company.
Well, we all know the gamble paid off, and its success gives us a blueprint. We can actually distill Marvel's entire strategy down into 3 universal, actionable lessons that apply to pretty much any industry.
The very first film out of the gate, Iron Man, was made on a relatively lean budget of $140 million. It brought back over $585 million worldwide. That single data point did everything. It validated the entire self-financing model and basically secured the company's future overnight.
So here's the blueprint. Lesson 1. Monetize your core IP in an asset-light model. Marvel realized they weren't in the business of printing comics, they were in the business of characters. Lesson 2. Isolate your risk. That non-recourse loan allowed them to take a huge, innovative gamble without threatening the core business. And Lesson 3. Frugality is a prerequisite for innovation. The intense cost-cutting after bankruptcy created the stable financial base they needed to launch the studio.
And this timeline just lays it all out perfectly. You go from bankruptcy in 1996 to securing that game-changing financing in 2005, to proving the whole model worked with Iron Man in 2008, which led directly to the multi-billion-dollar Disney acquisition just 1 year later. It's an incredible trajectory. So, the autopsy is complete. What Marvel's story proves is that sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones hidden in plain sight, the ones your competitors have already dismissed. It shows that with the right strategy and especially the right financial structure, it is possible to build an empire from the assets that nobody else wants. So the final question isn't really about Marvel. It's about you. What dormant asset in your industry is just waiting for its own Phoenix Gambit?